I don't know if you heard about this or not, but this story jumped out at me. It's Stellantis headquarters. If you want the best parking spots, you better be driving one of their cars because if you're not, you got to park in the back or you end up getting a ticket. Think about that. Where you park at work is now tied to what you drive. So the question is that company pride or is it corporate overreach? Let's bring in Roshini Rajkumar, attorney, political strategist, and host of the Crisis Files podcast. Good morning, Roshini. How are you?
Kevin, I am so excited to talk about this with you. When producer Laura texted me yesterday, I was just kind of chomping at the bit on this one. There's so much good stuff here.
I know. It's great. So the story came about because somebody did not drive a Stellantis product car, and they parked up close, and there's a sign that says Stellantis vehicles only. And not only did they parked there, but they ended up getting a ticket and have to pay for it. What are your thoughts on this from a company standpoint?
Yeah, both a company and let's talk legal. My legal mind was all over this. And granted, this is internal police or security giving these tickets. This isn't Auburn Hills Police or the state troopers giving these tickets. Then we'd really have a problem. But the first question I asked is, this seems illegal. And I realize private companies can do different things than governmental entities can. So I looked it up, and accordingly, it says it is not illegal for an employer to require an employee to own or drive a specific type of vehicle. But then the caveat is if it is a necessary job requirement. And when we think about a necessary job requirement, we think about food delivery drivers or postal people or delivery vans. Those are vehicles that you think about that it's necessary for the job. But in my mind, I look at this saying, what if an employee can't afford a Stellantis vehicle? Then we get into some discriminatory action. So I want your listeners who are employees of Stellantis to listen up, because I think they need to go to HR or their bosses and really find out, because Stellantis has some explaining to do here. These are, I believe, very restrictive rules they're putting into place, and it really kind of reeks of a little bit of illegality to me, and it goes way beyond company pride, Kevin.
Well, I'm really interested because our general manager here at the station has a sign up reserved for the general manager, and I'd love to park in that spot right up front.
Well, that's a little different, Kevin. I don't want to get you fired, but so that's a one spot that's kind of a perk of his role being the GM. And maybe it's even written up in his contract. You get your own parking spot. I mean, we see this for presidents of universities, CEOs, other people like that. And then obviously there are handicap spots that none of us should be parking in unless we are allowed to and display that in our vehicle. This is different because it doesn't seem like, I'd love to see their company handbook. Did it say when they got involved and got hired, these are some of the requirements of working at Stellantis? And that's why I say this smacks of possible illegality, because if you take a job and don't know that you're required to drive a certain car, you might not take that job because at the end of the day, maybe you don't have a salary that could afford it, or maybe you're putting 5 kids through school and you can't buy a new car and you're driving around in your beat up old Honda. You shouldn't be discriminated against. So that's kind of where I am with this, Kevin. Because it's internal security, we have a little bit of more of a hill to climb if an employee wanted to take this up, as I am really hopefully persuading some of them to do,
right?
Because it just doesn't seem fair.
No, and I wonder what it does for morale if, you happen to have a car that's not a Stellantis, and maybe it's because you can't afford a Stellantis. How do you feel when you got to park in the back 40 and people with the Stellantis are able to park up front? And in the back of my head, I would be really worried that somebody who's driving a Stellantis might get a promotion over me or might get a raise over me, and I wouldn't know it. So I would feel very pressured to get in a Stellantis one way or another.
Yeah, and I like where your mind is going with this. I mean, where does this end? Where does this behavior control end? And I'm just going to say Stellantis because that's who landed in the Wall Street Journal. Where does it end? You can't be requiring people to do things that are arbitrary. So the law the actual law, whether it's the Constitution or statutory law in any state, is looking at, is this requirement arbitrary or capricious? That's the language that's used. And if all of us need to drive 60 miles an hour on this particular highway, it's all of us. It's not arbitrary. You could be any color, creed, religion. You got to go 60 miles an hour. But this is a little different because it gets into what you can afford, what your role is, what your title is. I mean, I love it when companies have 10 spots for visitors. So when I go see my client, I do get to park right in front of their door. I'm not an employee. I don't get some of the other perks of being an employee. I have to get a security badge and, all that stuff you have to do when you go to these companies these days. So I would really advise some friendly legal and pre-crisis, crisis prevention advice. I would advise the leaders at Stellantis to look at this. And if they wanted to turn it around into something fun, maybe it's you get to win. If you win Employee of the Week or something like that, there's a whole section right up near the front door that you can park in. And maybe you turn it into something like that versus, are you driving one of our cars?
Yeah, because I don't think this actually helps sales per se. There's a certain number of employees there, but it's not enough to move the needle a great deal. And it seems like this policy has the potential to backfire.
It does. And companies don't need things that are preventing the return to office vibe. There are enough people that are ticked off that companies are requiring 3, 4, 5 days in the office. I'm one of those people because of the work I do, the work you do. You got to show up and be at work. It's just how it is. So I've never really kind of thought of it that way. But plenty of people post-COVID are very ticked off about not being able to work 5 days a week or 6 days a week or 3 days a week from home. So when I advise companies, do everything you can to incentivize employees to want to be at the office. And it really does start with the car. It starts with the car. And maybe you could have 50 spots that are for Employee of the Week, Employee of the Month, a certain team won an award, or visitors, but everything else is first come, first serve. And that to me is the most transparent, the most fair, and puts you in a situation where you're not going to get in trouble with the law and you're not going to get in trouble with really bad optics with your employees and with the media. I frankly can't wait for our former station and all the TV stations in town to go do this story, Kevin, in your market.
Well, after they hear this, they'll get the idea and they'll go do it. I think about the recruiters that these companies have, and their job is to go out and find the best of the best and bring them to Stellantis. And then they say, "Oh, we're great. You're going to take the job. Fantastic. By the way, if you don't drive a Stellantis, you're going to have to park 200 feet away, and the temperatures in February are -10. Is that person gonna come take this job at Stellantis?
No, it is such a disincentive. And my guess is recruiters aren't leading with that. So that's going to be one of those little fishy things you find out. And now we know, because you're doing this segment, employees everywhere should be asking these questions about, can I just park where I want to park before they accept a job? I mean, it is absolutely crazy to me. And how I look at it is, you are really in this time when we're trying to be much more equitable when it comes to pay, when it comes to bringing all different kinds of people into our workforces. You don't require someone to live in a certain kind of house, hopefully, to work at your company. You shouldn't require them to drive a certain car to work at your company. It's un-American to me, and that is not part of the optics or the narrative that Stellantis wants. And it just seems so unfair. So, I mean, this, obviously you can tell this story has got me going this morning. Everything's firing on this when it comes to crisis and possible lawsuits against Stellantis.
Roshini Rashtrabar, attorney, political strategist, host of the Crisis Files. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.